In the sake of time, let me go ahead and start. For those of you who are new, welcome. So glad that you're joining this session with Joyce Zhang today. And the official title is MIT Dating Coach Presents Frameworks for Love. So we're going to turn it over to Joyce momentarily. But for those of you who have not met, I'm Adela Jamal, SFMBA 22, and I'm also one of the AMITA board members helping with the program. So if you see the programs, you like the programs, feel free to reach out to us and let us know how you're enjoying what we're putting together. And also, if you have ideas, we're all ears. I'm also here with Wendy Gilman, class of 87, who is a new addition to our board. Very excited to have her. So I'm going to pass it over to Wendy. We'll go around and just introduce the rest of the AMITA board and then turn it over to Joyce for this great 1 hour discussion. So everyone, welcome. Please add your questions and comments to the chat, and we'll hopefully have a great session. Wendy, over to you.
Thank you, Adela. Hi, I'm Wendy Gilman, as she said, class of 87. So thrilled to be here tonight. I don't need dating advice myself, but I have children who are young adults, and I am fascinated by what Joyce has to say to us. So Joyce, take it away.
All right. Thank you, Adela. Thank you, Wendy, Moana, and Sam. I'm so excited to be here to see some familiar faces and so many new folks. My name is Joyce Zhang. I am an MIT engineer, class of 2016, and now I am a full-time dating coach, which is a bit of a untraditional path. I didn't really expect myself to end up here when I was at MIT. So very excited to share my story with you today, as well as share some of my frameworks for love. Before I jump into it, I just want to say a big thank you to Amita again. I love how much they have really leaned in and helped and supported me. They have worked tirelessly in the background to make this happen. So just know that you're all in really good hands. And again, I'm super grateful and honored to have this opportunity to speak and meet all of you. Right, without further ado, I'll start sharing the agenda that we'll cover today. So I want to cover 5 things with you all. The first is I'll give you a brief story from how I went from MIT to dating coach, and then I'll walk you through 2 of my most popular frameworks that I use with my dating coaching clients to help them find meaningful relationships. And both of them are applicable outside of dating as well. So for any of you looking to improve friendships or co-working relationships, or even are already in a partnership, I'll also highlight ways you can apply those to those relationships as well. And then I will intersperse Q&A throughout each of these sessions because I really want to make this more of an interactive dialogue and conversation and really get to know you all. And finally, I would love to end with a piece that you cannot take the MIT out of me. This is an MIT event. So my goal is for all of you to leave with at least one thing that you're going to try in the next week as a result of something you learned today. So we'll talk about the piece at the end and excited to bring that in as well. So without further ado, I'm going to talk a little bit about my story first. So a few years ago, I was 9 months into trying to build an AI startup, just like a good MIT engineer, and I was exhausted and a bit embarrassed. I tried 3 different AI ideas with 3 different co-founders, and nothing was clicking. I'd even gone into Y Combinator, a major tech accelerator based here in San Francisco, with my sister the day after she graduated college. It should have been the dream, but something about it just didn't feel right, and so we turned it down. And one night I was at dinner with a founder friend and I was venting. I tried everything, I said. AI for bankers, AI for photographers, AI for engineers. I just can't get excited about any of them. And she looked at me and said, "But Joyce, you're obsessed with dating. Why don't you actually try working on an idea there?" And then I said, "But people keep telling me, oh, consumer doesn't make money. And I'm a straight product manager. I'm supposed to build fintech or AI or something really technical. And that's what gets funding." And she said, "But Joyce, what about Uber or Apple? They're huge, like honestly bigger than the enterprise companies." So I said, "Okay, I guess it just seems so hard to make the next Uber." And she just kept going. But you're so into dating. What if you just tried? Ultimately, I knew she was right, and I felt uncomfortable sitting with her words and reflecting on all that I'd spent my time on. For months, I'd been forcing myself to work on ideas that sounded smart, but I never tried building something around what I actually loved. And what I loved was cracking the code of dating. At that time, I'd been single for years. I'd read dozens of dating books, taken 2 dating classes. I even hired 4 different dating coaches. I'd basically been running a one-woman R&D lab on my own love life. But every time I thought about turning that obsession into something real, I shut myself down. I told myself, consumer doesn't make money, enterprise is a safer bet. Working on dating is super weird. It's definitely not prestigious, and I don't see anyone who looks like me or has a background like me doing this. What will people think? And I'm a technical person. I went to MIT. I'm supposed to build an AI app. And this was right around when ChatGPT was blowing up, so the pressure was really on. And still, I could not ignore the truth, which was that I was struggling to make myself work on those AI ideas. I'd open up my laptop on the weekend and force myself to get excited about this, and it felt like a chore. And instead, I was spending all my free time learning about dating because that felt like fun. So after that dinner, I decided it was time to actually give it a real shot. So 4 days later, I recorded a 90-second selfie video pitching myself as a dating coach just to start talking to potential users, and I DM'd that video to 100 friends. Most people ignored me. Some people said, oh, cool, but no thanks. A few people actually hated it and told me it was a bad idea, and that really stung. But a handful signed up for a call, and those few people changed everything. As I started working with these new clients, I realized I didn't actually want to build another app, even though that's what everyone else around me did to solve problems. I realized that I wanted to build relationships. I loved helping people with A-plus careers, like many MIT alumni, build A-plus relationships, not just with their dates, but with themselves. And that's when it really hit me. This was the first time in my life that I was doing something not because I was supposed to, but because I wanted to. So flashback to me in high school, I was pre-med. I even dissected a cadaver before I could vote. I just thought, well, being a doctor seemed impressive and I could probably make my Asian parents proud, so that seems like a good idea. And then I got into MIT, the best engineering school in the world, and I chose to study Course 10, chemical engineering, because I heard from a bunch of seniors that it was the hardest major. And I figured if I could do the hardest major at the hardest school and survive, then I could do anything. And then after MIT came BCG and then Stripe, each move so logical and beautiful on my resume. My whole life was effectively a case study in doing the right thing until that dinner. That night, my friend didn't just suggest a new business idea, she challenged my entire operating system. MIT had taught me how to optimize, but no one had ever taught me how to listen to what I actually wanted. So I started coaching. I fell in love with it. Every session lit me up. I finally understood what my MIT friends back in the day had felt when they had talked about their research. That obsessive, joyful, I can't stop thinking about this feeling. I finally understood what it meant to be doing work that actually made me feel alive. And I realized something else. I'd actually been building up an insurance policy my whole life. In high school and at MIT, I studied long hours, as I'm sure many of you have, to earn A's in my engineering degree. In consulting and tech, I again worked long hours to get promotions and the next job. And while none of these were my true passions, I now had the connections and pedigree to feel safe taking a career risk. I knew that I could always go back to corporate. And it was now time to cash in on my insurance policy. The summer after I started coaching, I had gotten booked up working part-time. I knew it was time to leave Stripe to be a full-time dating coach. In fact, I'd actually be dishonoring my younger self who toiled through sleepless nights of studies and work and PSETs by not taking advantage of the freedom I'd earned. That was the moment I stopped working for prestige and started working for purpose. And my purpose, I've discovered, is helping people make one of the most important decisions of their lives. And it's helping my younger self. I mean, I was single for 5 long years. And in many of those years, I had a weekly breakdown. I felt sad, alone, and so just disappointed about my dating life. I've been trying for so long to no end. I kept asking myself these same painful questions. Why am I still single? What's wrong with me? Why is everything else in my life going well, like my career and friendships, but I can't figure out dating? So like I did at MIT and at work, I made dating a project. It took me years of swiping through thousands of profiles, going on hundreds of dates, and iterating my process to hack my dating life. And it worked. Now, every day, I feel deeply loved, supported, and seen by my partner, and I want everyone to experience those feelings too. But I don't want it to take as long or be as painful of a journey. So now I get to teach ambitious engineers, leaders, and founders how to apply the same structure and curiosity they use at work to finding an exceptional partner and deepening their relationship with themselves. And I teach them what took me 3 years to learn in 3 months. I get to be the person I wish I had when I was single and struggling. It's even become a nationwide movement. Over 200 leaders from places like MIT, Harvard, and Stanford have come to my signature connection event called Hot Feelings. And at the last event, there were even 6 Y Combinator founders who were working on AI. It's an experiential workshop where intentional daters practice their empathy skills and meet like-minded, ambitious, and kind singles. The most important part is that every day I get to wake up and work on what is truly aligned with my soul. I used to think success meant following the smartest people on the smartest path, and now I know it means having the courage to step off the path and finally to live the life I built all that insurance for. Right. So thanks everyone for hearing my story. I want to open it up now to a little bit of Q&A or thoughts and reflections. I'm curious as I shared my story, if any thoughts, feelings, or questions came up for you.
Joyce, I would just be, I'm not surprised to hear that you did not have a straight line path to what you're doing now, because I think those of us who have been out for a while have found that it's not a straight line to find what you love to do.
Definitely not. I was not an undergrad at MIT thinking that I would become a dating coach. I probably surprised my Asian parents quite a bit as well. Okay, so Amit asks, how did you go about meeting the right person? Dating apps aren't working. It's like looking for a needle in a haystack. So it's interesting that you bring that up, Amit, because the thing I tell my clients to set expectations is that going on a dating app is indeed more like finding a needle in the haystack than swimming in a pool of gold. I mean, in some respects, I think now the MIT admit rate is 5% or lower. It's kind of insane. Kind of applies for dating as well. Like, most people will not be a fit. And there's so much more I could say on the specific tactics of dating, but the thing I will lead with is that everyone I coach is extremely intelligent and accomplished, and figuring out the strategy and the tactics is not the hard part. People know they can go on a dating app or go out and talk to more people. The hardest part of dating that I see consistently for myself and my clients is having the emotional resilience to keep going, to keep trying, to believe that you haven't found that needle in the haystack yet, and to continue having the faith so you can keep getting creative about how you do it until you find the person. So that's the deeper work that I think is so fascinating about this. It's much less about optimizing the profile, which is part of it, but that's not the hard part, especially for the smart people like you all that I work with. Okay. So I see Michelle says she thought about the differences in drive and desire to find a partner, sometimes want a partner and sometimes don't. And is the effort really worth it if one has a satisfying life, either supportive family and great friends? I think it's a great question, Michelle. I remember when I started off with a number of clients, and now it's actually a pretty standard part of when I onboard someone new. I asked them, well, why do you want a partner? And specifically to be super clear about what you want versus what other people in your life are telling me, which was clearly a theme in my life. I was doing things that other people told me I should do. And one of the things that I try to break it down into this is my MIT brain really coming online, into component parts, is what needs are you trying to get in a partnership, or you think you will have, that you can't get anywhere else in your life? For most people, they tell me things like, I want to have a monogamous relationship, and so I only want to be with that one partner intimately. I'm like, okay, great. Or I definitely want to have kids with a family, with a partner. I think things like that are very objective, and so if that's really something that's important to you, that makes sense. But if their answer is more focused on, oh, I want companionship and I want someone to talk to and I want support, then it might be, to your point, how can I get all those needs met by my friends and family first, see how I feel, and then reassess what is it specifically that I can only get from a partnership. So I think it's great that you're posing that, Michelle. It's really important, I think, to hone in on what exactly is the unique thing you want from a partnership. Okay, I see a bunch of additional questions. I'm going to move on to the next section in the spirit of time, and I'll come back to some of the questions later, but I'm really grateful that everyone is engaging here. Okay, so I shared a little bit about my story here, and now I'd love to walk you through one of my first frameworks for love, and is the fundamental framework I use across all my work, called the 4 Pillars of Compatibility. And again, this is taking the very best of my MIT and BCG training and trying to break down this equation of finding one's long-term partner into 4 mutually exclusive, completely exhaustive pillars. So I call them GPI. They stand for goals, physical, intellectual, and emotional. And I just say GPI because it makes it easier to remember. So I'll walk you through what those 4 are, and then we'll talk about each of them in more depth. Number 1 is G, goals. Do your life visions align? It's kind of like some of the things I was talking about in response to Michelle's comments about, is it about family? Is it about living in a certain place with a family, getting married? Like, what are those goals that you have in your life so we can see if someone else is compatible with that? The second piece is P, or physical. Do you feel drawn to them physically? So I've seen for some people this is very, very obvious, and I've also seen clients, including an MIT alum or two, who really intellectualize physical connections. So that actually can be sometimes hard to figure out, and I'll talk about ways to get around that. Number 3 is I, intellectual. Do they challenge and engage your mind? And again, I think this is something that would ideally be obvious to an MIT alum, but I've also seen really technical folks struggle with this because they're looking too much at just resume and not the actual connection. I'll say more about that in a moment. And finally is E, emotional. Do you feel safe, valued, and understood with this person? This is probably my favorite because it gets into juicy communication topics, which we'll talk more about in a second, and is super important for having a long-term relationship. One thing I want to note before we go into each of these pillars in detail is that for a romantic relationship, it is really important to have alignment across all 4. And I find this framework to be super helpful, especially if I'm working with a client who comes in and tells me, oh, I just kind of date based on vibes, or like, I think it's good. Or if they're feeling really confused as to whether they should continue seeing someone or not. If you want to apply this to relationships outside of work, I think of friends as someone with whom we have great intellectual and emotional compatibility, but we don't have goals and physical compatibility. We're just not interested in them in that way. And maybe even for work relationships, you may see that similarly as well. Or I want a coworker who I feel intellectually stimulated by and who I feel safe to share about what's really going on at work with. So those are some ways you can apply what I'm about to share in other relationships. And finally, of course, if you're already in a relationship, you can think about, as we go through these, how you and your partner align on each of these. So number 1 is G, goals compatibility. So I'll give you an example of what that means. I shared this a little bit earlier. It could be, I want to get married and have kids in 5 years, and I want to work remotely and live on a rural farm. So that's super helpful to know, because if someone comes to you and they're like, I definitely don't want to have kids and I only want to live in this block in Manhattan, that might be pretty different. And before going out into the wild and talking about this on a date, I recommend reflecting a little bit. So for example, what are your most important life goals? Especially, what are the life goals that you want to achieve with a partner? And be clear about which ones must a partner align with for long-term compatibility. So distinguish between what is truly absolutely needed versus not. For example, you definitely want to have kids is more objective than, oh, I would like to go skiing once a year with my partner. So how to assess this on an actual date? So a simple way to bring this up, especially if you want to bring this up in a more casual way, I suggest bringing up one of those future aspirations and just notice how they react. So for example, you could say, oh yeah, I was hanging out with my nephew last weekend. He's so cute. I'm so excited to be a parent. And just notice how they respond. Are they engaging with excitement? Do they share similar dreams? Or are they just kind of like, okay, whatever? And objectively speaking, do their long-term goals contradict or line up with yours? One pro tip I have here before I pause and check in with folks for questions is that I actually recommend to all of my clients and all of my Substack subscribers to text this to their date before getting on the first date. I know for some people you might hear that and be like, wow, that's so intense, Joyce. But I've just seen way too many daters, really smart people, clients who are in relationships for 3 years, 3 months, 3 weeks, only to realize they're not compatible on something that's a pretty objective, this is compatible or not. So I really recommend sharing this even before your first date. It can really save you a ton of time. And I call that technique hardballing. Okay, let me pause and see how people are doing. I do love the chat, but I do feel a little bit like I'm talking to myself. So if anybody wants to come off mute and chime in on any questions they have so far, I'd love that.
A few people have alluded in the chat, including myself, have alluded to the dating challenge for older people,
Mm.
50, 60, 70, 80, whatever,
Mm-hmm.
who may have come out of long-term relationships. And it seems to me the things you're mentioning are still very applicable, but uh, could you comment on that?
Yeah, I appreciate you bringing that up, Barry. It's such a great question. I'm curious what specific aspect you're interested in hearing more about. Like, how would you specifically assess goals for someone your age? Yeah, I'm curious to hear more about your question.
Um, I think it's more about, for example, uh, at what point we have to be less super people and more just people who have our own things that, whatever age, our own disappointments, our own, you know, our own unsuccesses as well. And how, I would, and where that goes, I would think that goes somewhere in the, emotional and, as being very honest about that pretty early on and seeing how the other people react.
I love that, Barry. You're like writing my slide before I even get to it. That's pretty much what I'm going to talk about. Um, Let me come back to that on the emotional slide. I love that you already thought of that piece. I think it's super important for us in especially some of these earlier dates to share a little bit about those things that you're mentioning, some of these life experiences that are important or even challenging, and see how someone responds to that. I think that's super critical. I will come back to that in a few slides. Thank you. Okay. So let's move on to number 2, which is P, or physical compatibility. So again, as I mentioned earlier, for some people this is obvious, for some people it is harder to assess. An example of how I would describe this is when you look at this person, you just want to be physically closer to them. And I think the key here is that this is less about assessing their objective beauty, which is part of it, but more noticing how your own body reacts when you're around this person. So some reflection questions that can be helpful, especially if you've never thought about how you uniquely experience physical attraction, would be, how much does physical attraction matter to you in the long run? And what specific aspects matter? Is it about a certain form of intimacy? Is it about keeping up our appearances? Just get clear on what does that actually need to look like for you to be satisfied long term in this relationship. Another thing that I find super helpful is understanding if you're the kind of person for whom physical attraction is pretty immediate, you just see someone and you know it, or if you are the kind of person where it can actually grow as you get to know someone, or you don't usually feel at the beginning, and that takes time for you to get to know someone to feel more of that physical attraction. And finally, this is an important pattern to notice if this does apply to you, or if you know someone. Have you ever overlooked deeper incompatibilities because you had really strong physical chemistry? It's important to weigh all 4 of the pillars, not just commit to someone just because of one of them, like this. So on your next date, I suggest using the face test. So this is a method I created where basically while you're on the date, as you sit across from your date or next to them, you want to look at them and just notice, do I want to get closer or further away from their face? And again, the whole point is to not intellectualize and analyze so much, like, do I find this person attractive? It's more to come back into your body and just to notice, what is my body doing around this person? Am I instinctively wanting to be closer, or am I actually like back here and feeling repulsed, but I'm just trying to convince myself to feel something because everything else about them is great? And finally, of course, would spending more time with them change how you feel? The last thing I want to say on the physical piece is that this is not about judging someone for what they look like. It's more about getting clear on how you experience physical attraction and attuning to your own body when you're in the presence of someone else. Okay, I'm going to do one more slide and then we're going to pause for questions. So next one is I, or intellectual compatibility. So an example here is, I expand my worldview and self-understanding in our conversations, and I become a smarter person as a result of spending time with them. I would respect their opinion and would go to them for advice on my work and life. So what I want to clarify here is an example that I mentioned earlier. I have this client, amazing, super smart, Ivy League grad, and he told me, oh, I went on this date with this great girl. She had an amazing resume, also Ivy League, all this great stuff. Like, I thought we would be compatible, but just, I didn't really get that much out of the conversation. We couldn't really go deep intellectually. And so I think that's the thing to consider here. Maybe you look at, oh, someone's an MIT astrophysicist, like I'm an MIT alum too, like we definitely are intellectually compatible. And that's actually different from the experience of having a conversation with them. It's not just, do I learn new content from them, but do I respect the way they think? Do I let them influence how I think? Is this someone I could actually see a decade from now problem solving a really difficult challenge for us or for our family together? And I trust their opinion to even solve my own challenges. So there's a couple of pieces here. And some of the questions you can ask yourself as reflection is, how do you want your future partner to challenge and inspire you? And what conversations with your family and friends intellectually stimulate you, and why? Why do you like talking to these other people you already have in your life? And finally, as you'll see in the theme, there's a way to assess this on a date that is effectively like simulating what's going to actually happen in that future relationship. So Barry mentioned this a little bit on the emotional side. The equivalent for the intellectual side is to ask for advice on a real challenge that you're working through. Not something that's too big, but something small and real. So for example, you could even bring it up on a first date. Oh, I'm thinking about moving teams at work, but I don't know how that will affect my relationship with my current manager. And just see how they respond. Are they getting in there with you and their answers sparking new thoughts? Are they challenging you? Are they asking you questions that make you feel curious? Are they getting really invested? Maybe they even follow up later and ask how it's going. That gives you more signal on how this person might interact with you when you're dealing with real things with them later on in your relationship. Okay, I'm going to pause for a quick question before I do E. So if anyone wants to come off mute, feel free to ask a question. If not, that's okay. I will move on to emotional. Okay, I'm going to keep going. I know there's a lot of chat questions, so maybe I'll come back to that in a moment. All right, so number 4 is E, emotional compatibility, our final pillar of compatibility. So what does this look like? I feel understood and valued for what I appreciate about myself. I feel safe to share vulnerable feelings, both positive and constructive, and trust that they will respond with empathy and care. So some reflection questions you might ask yourself to clarify, what does emotional compatibility mean for me, is really getting clear. And I even practice this with some of my clients, closing their eyes, imagining themselves a decade, 2 decades out in this ideal relationship. How do they feel inside every day when they're with this person? So some of the words that clients have come up with are, they want to feel valued, seen, understood, or cared for. I think of these as your North Star feelings. So some people may know of North Star metrics from the workplace. I think of these as North Star feelings. Specifically, I had a female client who was divorced and had a pattern of choosing men who weren't really caring for her, to be honest. And what we did to help her change some of her patterns was to identify what these feelings are, so that when she was on dates, she was focused more on how she felt in their presence, less so having to scrutinize exactly all the things that they said. And now she's in a wonderful relationship. So on your next date, here's how you can simulate this. So again, we want to basically have a mini version of a conversation you think you would have with this person if you actually committed to them. So I suggest sharing something personal and observe their response. Again, it doesn't need to be super deep, super trauma dumping, just something small that's a little more tender, and just see how they respond. So it could be, my best friend just told me they're moving away. I'm getting older and I'm feeling down about it. It's really hard to find community sometimes. And just notice, how do they respond? Do they listen? Do they ask follow-ups? Are they showing care? Are they engaging with you? Or are they just like, oh, okay, that sounds hard, and kind of stay distant from you? And again, I think so much more important than the exact words they use is how you feel based on their response. Is their response making you feel safe or encouraged to even share more about this personal thing that you're taking the risk to be vulnerable about? All right, so any questions on GPIE or GPI before I move on to the second framework?
Joyce, where do you find that people where do you find that people have a hard time adopting this framework? Like where do they get stuck doing it?
Stuck. Also, sorry, I love the question and I can't see who asked that, so I'm just gonna respond. Um, I think the hardest part really varies for each person. I think objectively speaking, E is the most difficult to assess ultimately. And the reason why I say that is that there's so much more nuance to E than some of the others. For example, for the goals piece, you can spend a lot of time just getting clear on what you want and learning to feel comfortable and confident communicating that. Physical, if that's really a challenge, I use the face test or some other mechanisms like that. Intellectual, usually after I explain it a few times, people will be able to pick up on it. I think the hardest part is emotional compatibility because one, I think the biggest thing I see is never that, I mean, no, they're amazing people. They went to MIT or schools like this. And I consistently see the bar far too low for emotional compatibility. It's like, oh, I have fun with this person. Like, yeah, that seems right. But then I'm like, you said you shared about your loss of your grandparent and they didn't really respond or engage with that. Like, how did you feel when they did that? And it's really easy to miss small things like this because there's so many ways they can kind of argue that, like, oh, yeah, it is fine. And I think the challenge here and why this is so difficult is that most people are not getting that vulnerable on dates. They're staying at the surface level, which we're about to talk about with the 5 levels of communication. And I don't see that many people, especially the clients when they start, actually taking the risk to share. You know, when you said this to me last time on the previous date, like I felt kind of confused or I felt worried and I just wanted to understand that better. That's the kind of communication you're actually going to have in a long-term relationship if you truly want to get to know each other. And most people are not doing that on early dates, at least when they first start working with me. So I really think this is the hardest.
I was curious, so Michelle, I was curious as to why spirituality uh, isn't one of the pillars. And spirituality is also a very broad term, but I was wondering why that wasn't part of your pillars.
Yeah, thanks, Michelle. So I've seen some other dating coaches include spirituality in their version of this list. For me, I see that as first an inquiry of like what aspect of that is important to you. So for example, I do have some clients who are religious and want to share that specific faith or raise their children in that faith with their partner. To me, that falls under goals. For something else, like I'd say for me, I don't have a specific religion. I do consider myself a spiritual person. And so for me, that might fall more under intellectual or even emotional compatibility. Like when I share with you how my grandmother's passing last year affected me and how that connects to how I experience spirituality, like how does that, how do you respond? So I think if I'm talking to a client about that, I would want to understand like what specifically about their spirituality do they want to share with their partner or be seen or heard for? And then I can come up with them specific things that we can do. Maybe it's goals or emotional or intellectual to help assess that.
Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks, Michelle. Hi, Peter. You're on mute.
You are right. Thank you so much for this evening. And I
Thank you.
just wanted to appreciate like a theme, I feel like a recurring theme you're bringing out is the actually observing our own responses, like noticing how we're feeling. And it ties back to your story where you're describing like for those of us who are really success oriented, we can be very outer directed. We can really be used to looking at metrics of how we're doing outside of ourselves. And it can be like turning a large ship in the ocean to actually, on a date, just be noticing how one is feeling oneself,
For
as
sure.
opposed to, am I making the sale? How's this going? How's this going? And so I'm just really appreciating that lens or perspective that you're bringing here.
Thanks, Peter. I'm really glad that that piece landed with you. I mean, both when I was making past career decisions or earlier when I was dating, I was just so much analyzing what was happening on the date versus my own internal experience. And what I would say to all of this is ultimately, yeah, we can assess these things about the other person, but I think of finding or choosing a partner rather as choosing the person that's going to bring out the best side of us, the side of us that feels most loved or valued. So I think in many ways, our own internal experience is far more important than analyzing nitty-gritty details about them. Karen, I see your hand is up. I'm going to actually move on to the next framework in the spirit of time, and then I'd love to come back to you.
Okay.
All right. So we're now going to move on to the second framework for love, which is called the 5 levels of communication. So this is taking the emotional compatibility pillar, my goodness, emotional compatibility pillar, and breaking it down to some more detail and helping you get a sense of where you might currently be at in terms of your skill for a deeper emotional connection. So this framework is actually taken from Stanford Business School's most popular elective for the past 40 years called Interpersonal Dynamics, or some people know it colloquially as touchy-feely. And I've done a lot of hours of learning this methodology, and this is one of the frameworks they teach to help you get a better awareness of where you might be at in conversation and where you might have more opportunity to deepen your emotional connection with others. And as you might have guessed, this framework is actually intentionally meant for business folks to start off with. And when I learned this, I was just blown away because I saw so much application to dating. So I want to share with you how this applies in a more dating context, but know that all the things I'm about to share can apply for any relationship where you want to feel more connected to the other person. And I know I would not have the depth of connection with my partner without this. So I'm super excited to share about this. The slides are from Stanford coach Ed Batista. So level 1 is ritual. So as you can see, we're starting at the very top of the iceberg and staying at the more shallow levels, and then we'll go to some of the deeper levels of connection below the iceberg. Ritual is pretty basic. Every culture has their version of it. It's basically, how are you? How are you doing? Pretty safe way to communicate with someone, especially someone you don't know very well. Level 2 is extended ritual, aka small talk. These are things like, oh, how's the weather going? Or did you see the game last night? Pretty inoffensive, innocuous things to continue a conversation if you're just trying to get to know someone or opening a conversation. Level 3 is content. This is usually facts or information about yourself or other people or things. So for example, you might say, oh, I'm on this event or this workshop with Joyce. Or I might say, I'm a dating coach for high performers. Or it could even be you saying on a date, I broke up with my ex last year. So all of those are facts. Level 4 is feelings about content. So feelings about facts. Let's say I was on that date and I decided to share, I broke up with my ex last year. That would be the content. And then I might add, I was feeling really sad about the breakup for a long time. And I took some time to heal and to process. And I'm feeling a lot more optimistic and confident now. I'm feeling good about being here. And so that is actually getting a little bit more vulnerable, not just sharing the content of what happened, but how you feel about it. And this is where I think a lot of people I've seen tell me, well, I'm super vulnerable on dates. I talk about my exes, my family, and then I ask them if they share their feelings about that content, and they're like, oh, I don't. So there's an interesting nuance here. And finally, level 5, which I see is the hardest for folks sometimes, is feelings about each other. So let's say you just shared all that context about your ex and you're feeling sad, you're feeling bad. You shared all that context with me. I might respond, I'm feeling really tender hearing about your breakup, and I feel really grateful that you felt comfortable sharing that with me. So now I'm taking our conversation to the relational. How are we feeling between me and you? Rather than I'm just sharing things about me. And level 5 is where we ultimately can feel the greatest depths of connection. It can be both positive, like I just mentioned, or it can be something more constructive, like when you said this thing, I felt worried or I felt even angry. So before I pause to say a little bit more about this, I have to say this for all the overachievers. The goal is not to be at level 5 all the time. Just knowing these 5 levels exist allows you to have more awareness of where you're actually at different points in conversation, so you can be more choiceful when you want to go a little bit more on the surface or when you want to deepen connection a little bit more. The last thing I want to say here is, especially in dating, most people get stuck here on content. When I ask people, they're not converting the dates, they're not going on more dates, I'm asking them, what are you talking about? And if I hear that's really staying at facts, they're not sharing any feelings about each other, I'm like, that makes sense if you keep hearing, I don't feel a romantic connection from the people you're going on dates with, because we need to have that emotional human to human connection to then foster more romantic connection. Okay, I'm gonna pause here, and I know Karen had a question earlier, so Karen, if you want to come back, you're welcome to, or if someone else has a question specifically about the 5 levels of conversation, I'd love to chat about that.
This is Karen.
Hi.
Hi. Actually, I was going to ask about emotional content, and then, of course, you've gone a little deeper here. And one of the questions I have is temperament. You know, there's some people that are very intense, very passionate, others
Mm.
are very calm. And
Mm-hmm.
you get to know, the more you know yourself, you know who you're compatible with. You know,
Mm-hmm.
two extremely passionate people may have very volatile relationship.
Mm-hmm.
So how does one assess that in a dating situation if you've already, you know, and you have some self-awareness about where you're comfortable?
Yeah, that's a great question, Karen. You're actually reminding me of one of my clients who basically told me like, oh, I tend to like really fiery people. I'm like, oh, let's get curious about that. On the temperament piece, I think there's 2 things that come to mind. I would first get curious with the person I'm working with, like, what is it about certain types of temperaments that really attract you to them? So you gave the example of both someone who is more fiery and someone who is more calm. So getting a sense from my client, why do they prefer one or the other, or maybe they don't know yet, is helpful, more specifically to understand why they are attracted to that. The other piece here, which comes back to a previous question that we talked about earlier, is I think of it less as like, okay, I want to choose someone with this specific temperament. Because one, every person may be different around you, like your unique chemistry between this combination of 2 people might be different. And ultimately, I would focus on how you feel about yourself around this person and choose the person around whom you like yourself the best. So it could be possible that someone who's super fiery and has a crazy temperament, but you actually just feel really safe and cared for by them for some reason because they just understand you. I don't know what it is. Maybe that could actually work. Or you might find, oh, okay, the people who are more calm temperamentally, like I actually resonate better with. But again, I would focus more on like how you feel around each of the people, and maybe you can see some patterns and understand, okay, why might I be attracted to one temperament or the other?
But there's no way to screen early on in the dating process to really get to know their temperament. You have to go down the road a bit so they can reveal themselves.
Yeah, it's a great point, and that's why I suggest some things like hardballing. So as I mentioned a little bit earlier on the goal slide, what I mean by hardballing is basically before you get on a first date, let's say you're on a dating app, before you get on a first date, texting the person, hey, I just, I'm excited to get to know you more. I just want to let you know up front that I'm looking to, get married and settle down or whatever it is in this number of years. I just want to be upfront about that and respect each other's time. And taking the risk to share something a little bit more vulnerable like that allows you to see a little bit more of someone's true color. Obviously, to your point, Karen, we can't perfectly simulate how they might exactly be 5 years down the road. But I myself sent this text to over 50 people, and basically the results were 25% of people responded super kindly. They're like, oh, thank you so much for sharing. I'm not looking for this, but like wishing you all the best. Great, save my time. 50% of people respond with like, oh, okay, cool. Or they actually made fun of me for being so upfront about what I wanted. And so I already was getting signal about like, oh, if I share something vulnerable about this person, like how did they even respond? And finally, there was 25% of people who acknowledged like, oh, I appreciate how transparent you are. I'm looking for the same thing. Here's more about me. I'd love to talk about that more in person. And the thing is, like all the people I then went on dates with in the middle 50%, they didn't suddenly turn out to be like super emotionally vulnerable and like empathetic right from the get-go. It was usually more the people in the latter 25%. So yeah, I want to acknowledge again, Karen, that I can't exactly predict everything that's going to happen later down the line. But I think with some of these intentional tools, and especially sharing it a little bit more vulnerably up front, we can get a little bit more of that signal earlier on, because most people are not going to respond that last 25%.
Thank you.
All right. I'm figuring out how to pronounce your name. Is it Aliana? Can you tell me how to pronounce it?
Yes, that's correct.
Okay, excellent. Nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you. I was wondering, in the context of communication, what do you think about the chase and like, people pretending to be hard to get and like not responding right away to text and playing those games?
I see. Okay. The chase, as in playing hard to get or not responding to text by a certain time. Well, I think it'd be interesting because I'm imagining, like, if it were in a coaching situation, is it my client who's doing that, or are they experiencing other people doing that? Because I might give a different answer. But ultimately, what I have spoken about in some of the previous pillars matter or relate to this is what I mean, is that the whole point to me of going on some of these earlier dates is it's a data gathering exercise. And what I mean by that is you want to see, can I figure out, let's say in 3 months, how this person might be, and I know it's not perfect, might be 3 years from now. So if I want to create the conditions to, this is really, I'm talking experimental mindset now. If I'm really trying to create an experiment where I'm gathering data that's an accurate representation of what I might be like or what this other person might be like 3 years from now, then it behooves us to show up as close to how we actually would in that future relationship as we do now. Obviously, there are nuances. I'm not suggesting we trauma dump on date 1 because that's something we would do on 3 years from now. But if someone is like, oh, I'm gonna like play this artificial game, but I wouldn't actually do that later on in a relationship, then you're kind of getting imperfect data if you're either on the receiving side or you're doing that. Now, obviously, you could tell me like, oh, Joyce, like, even 3 years from now, I also want to be chasing and play hard to get in my future relationship, which I would have separate questions for. But ultimately, I would come back to how can you create the conditions where you are simulating what it's actually going to be like to be with you in a long-term relationship.
That's helpful. Thank you.
Awesome. Okay, so I know we're coming up a little bit on time, so I know there's a bunch of questions. I'm excited about them. I want to cover the next few slides and then we'll see if we have some extra time. All right, so we did a bunch of Q&A. I'd love to now talk about our P-set. So as I mentioned, I'd love to leave everyone with at least one thing they're going to do over the next week based on something that they learned, or at least consider it. So what I want you to think about now is what's one thing you will do. I'll give you some examples to spark some inspiration based on which part of the talk resonated most with you. So number 1, if you really resonated with my personal story about going from living a life of should to living a life of want, you might want to journal about something in your life where you might be doing it more from a place of should rather than aligning with what you actually want. Another example is maybe the 4 pillars of compatibility really inspired you. You haven't thought about compatibility in that way. And so what you could do is to write down, okay, what am I actually looking for across goals, physical, intellectual, and emotional? And what might I actually try on my next date to get better and more data on that? So for example, as we were talking about with Barry, like maybe there's something from my past that I want to be really valued or respected for. So maybe I've tried that on a future date in a way and see how the other person responds. The last one is if the 5 levels of communication resonate with you most, it'd be awesome for you to think about where do I tend to hover? Am I staying at level 3 content? Do I go to level 5 feelings about each other too fast? Just notice what's happening there. I think for most people, it's probably not everyone, but probably you're too shallow to really develop deeper emotional connection. And you can choose one conversation, doesn't have to be a date, could be with a friend or a family member, and just challenge yourself to deepen your level of communication. So let's say you recognize, oh, I tend to stay at level 3 or sometimes level 4. This next time I see them, I'm going to share level 5. I'm going to share something that they did that really had a positive emotional impact on me as a way to challenge myself and deepen our connection. Anyone want to share their P-set that they want to give themselves? I know it's a little bit different from MIT where the professor just like gives you a bunch of PDFs to print out or whatever it is, but would love to hear if anyone has a P-set that they're giving themselves that they're excited about. Okay, I'm checking the chat too. Jonathan, you're gonna buy a journal. I love that for you. I hope you get one that's read. It's the spirit of MIT. Okay, I'm gonna keep going and I see there's more questions, so let's come back to that in a second. But if you actually do your P-set, I would love to hear about it. I'll be your P-set partner. Okay, so finally, huge thank you to everyone for coming out. I'd love to stay connected. I'm at the Joyce Zhang on different platforms, and there's a couple of things you can check out depending on what you like. If you like really long form podcasts, you're a podcast kind of person, I did an interview with an Andreessen Horowitz partner earlier this year. That was pretty fun. I write my weekly Substack, as I mentioned. Over 1,000 people subscribe every week. I'd love to see you on there. And if you're really just wanting some fun videos, I have that for you on Instagram as well. And finally, I would love feedback from everyone on your experience at this event today. I'm always looking to constantly improve. You cannot take that MIT part of me out. And I would love to hear more about you. And if you want to share a testimonial too, it makes a huge difference for helping me and hopefully Amita as well put on more events like this. I'd love
Thanks. And
to.
we'll go ahead and actually share, Joyce, for the AMITA requirements. We'll go ahead and actually share this with everyone who's attended, which will be perfect. So we'll
Excellent.
actually do an email to everyone who's joined. We'll do a little recap. There'll be a link to the recording. So we'll make sure that we actually connect everyone here so they can learn more about this, because I have to say we've had great attendance and also great attendance for the entirety of this. So it looks
Wow.
like the meeting really resonated with the audience, which is incredible. Almost 90 people here throughout.
Wow, thanks everyone. Is it a good
Wonderful.
time to take
Thank
a
you.
picture?
Yeah, so if anybody is good with a picture, please put your camera on. And if you're not comfortable with the photo, that's totally fine. You can turn off your cameras. But we thought we would get a group photo before we log off. So let's give everybody a chance. And we respect everyone's privacy. None of this is shared. This is a safe space for everybody. All right. I think we're good to go. All
Okay.
right, so we'll do a screen grab maybe in a couple seconds here. All right, so let's do a screen grab in 1, 2, and 3. Perfect.
Excellent. Thanks, Adela.
All right, everyone. Well, thank you. So I'm going to say a couple of words, and so is Wendy. If you have not had a chance to check out Amida, please do. We'd love to engage with you and have you sort of sign up for our newsletters, engage with the community, see what we've got coming up. And similar to this, we've actually got a number of activities that we've paired up with other groups. So definitely make sure that your alerts are signed on. Make sure that you've signed up and then also have your membership up to date. We really appreciate that. And then we also have a number of events coming up. So I'm going to pass it to Wendy. She's going to talk about what's next. But in the meantime, we really appreciate everyone spending their evening with us and getting to know us and Joyce. So thank you for your time. Wendy, over to you.
All right, and thank you. I'll echo Adela's comments for participating this evening. We do have 2 events coming up pretty quickly. One is this Friday. It's a virtual event, MIT Connects, connecting current MIT students, grad students with alums. So, and if you're an alum and you want to connect back with especially MIT women and provide them with some support, we'd love to have you. And then on December 7th, we have our annual Ellen Swallow Richards' birthday event. It is going to be a hybrid event, and this year's guest speaker is going to be Kayla Taub, class of 18. She is the current chef in residence at Boston Public Library, and we're really excited about hearing what she does in the field of food security and nutrition, which was one of Ellen's major activities. So again, thank you for being here, Joyce. Thank you for such a wonderful, wonderful conversation and discussion. I stole some notes I'm going to go share with my own offspring. And I think that is it for this evening. So thank you all very much. And just before we go, Samantha did drop in the chat the link to Amida. Thank you so much, Sam. And have a great evening. Take care,
Thanks,
everyone.
everyone. Good night.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
everyone. Thanks, Amanda.